Neighborhoods in the path of growth attract investment. While that often brings more jobs and amenities, it also creates uncertainty for longtime residents who are too often priced out of their own homes. But what if there were a way to harness the investment coming into neighborhoods while keeping the power and homes in the hands of residents? That's exactly what Trust Neighborhoods is doing. Today, I'm joined by David Kemper, co-founder of Trust Neighborhoods and a visionary in housing and urban development. David helped launch New York City's Division of Capital Planning, played a pivotal role in shaping Alphabet's Sidewalk labs, and worked on affordable housing finance under New York City Mayors Bloomberg and Blasio. Together, we explore how innovative financial tools can counter gentrification, stabilize communities, and redefine what it means to trust and invest in our neighbors. I'm Kate Gasparo, and this is Building Better Cities. I think what's really struck me, and through our conversations, this has come up again and again, like cities are these living and breathing entities, and they go through these individual cycles of boom and bust. We have familiarity with Detroit and Kansas City and now Boston and San Diego. What are your thoughts right now about where cities are positioned, and are they sort of in this resurgence, or do you see that in the cities you've been working in, there's still this hesitancy to come back to the urban core?
I had such confidence in coming back to the urban core pre-pandemic. You saw
Mhm.
the trends, you saw it in the demand for walkable urban neighborhoods, you saw the fact the United States cities basically under-delivered on an option to live in a walkable urban neighborhood given compared to the rest of the world, and that there was such interest in doing that, especially among young people, especially among retirees. The pandemic put that into question early on. We talk about affordability in a certain subset of neighborhoods. There were funders we talked to who, in the early days of the pandemic, went, "Oh, housing affordability is no longer going to be a problem because
Mhm.
the pandemic means people can live everywhere." And that turned out to be so false. Uh, as we've done this work and continue to watch these neighborhoods, we're at least seeing certainly an increase in prices and lack of affordability, though there have been such national trends of that. But really crucial is for a subset of walkable urban neighborhoods, which we have launched mixed income neighborhood trusts now in 5 of them. They have been growing in value disproportionate to their metropolitan area growing in value.
Mm.
And that is a really key piece of this, is that they are growing in value more than the rest of the city.
I just want to go back to your point about these urban cores in the 5 cities that Trust Neighborhoods works. You're seeing that the core is growing uh, faster and disproportionately faster than the rest of the city, even though businesses are not. Maybe I'm wrong interpreting that. No, you're nodding. Okay, you help me out.
No. It's certain neighborhoods. So it's
Mm,
even distinct from, I think, core. Like if you look at, in St. Louis had this big Wall Street Journal article on the doom loop of the
yes.
downtown. If you follow people in St. Louis or even know St. Louis, you go, the downtown they're referring to is a very distinct downtown. Even the article notes that just 5 blocks to the west of that, which is still essentially a downtown, it's boomed around the new soccer stadium and developments. And then really what is kind of the walkable center of the metropolitan area for that is much more the central West End and around the hospital and the university that has massively become in demand and invested in recent years. And then the neighborhoods that we've been working in, which is in South St. Louis, if you look at the neighborhoods which we view as too far in the path of growth, they have increased in value disproportionate to their metropolitan area over the last 10, 15 years. And
Mm,
it is very likely to continue on to the neighborhood we're working with. Um, that is all distinct from the downtown, which is the office towers against the river, which
yeah.
is in a really dire place there. So it's a nuance on what are
Yeah.
we talking about as
Right.
walkable urban core neighborhoods, and not every core neighborhood is following this.
Hmm. And just for listeners, the urban doom loop has been cited a lot over the last few years, especially since the pandemic. Seeing that these urban core areas that, what do you say, David? They're mostly business leaning. It's your commercial business districts, your downtowns, conventionally where people would go to work. The pandemic sort of deprived those areas of life since people weren't going to work there, and how that sort of has led to falling property values in those specific neighborhoods. But what you're talking about are the neighborhoods nearby that are mostly residential, have some retail or commercial aspects to them, but they're thriving because of the residential walkability component of those neighborhoods. Is that fair to say?
Yes, where those neighborhoods are nearby downtowns or cores that are more mixed use or more resilient, there is
Mhm.
a certain amount of strength.
Trust Neighborhoods has this mission to harness growth in a local area, a specific community, while also benefiting existing residents. And there's a lot of discussions around displacement and gentrification, especially with the rising cost of housing. And what you and your team are doing is so core to ensuring that communities that have legacy residents are still able to retain that character and that community while also move towards, that next chapter, that next phase of their lives. So can you talk about Trust Neighborhoods and the values the company has and its growth over the last 5 years?
Yeah. So Trust Neighborhoods is a nonprofit that works across the country supporting neighborhoods that are likely to use a shorthand gentrify, but this is that kind of increase in value disproportionate to their metropolitan area. We help existing organizations in those neighborhoods create something called a mixed income neighborhood trust. That mixed income neighborhood trust is a structure we created in partnership with a couple of the early neighborhoods and really listening to neighborhoods across the country. It is community governed, mixed income ownership, which is primarily housing so far, focused on making these neighborhoods even better places to live, improving housing quality through literal things like renovation and or construction of housing, but also through accountability. And then really importantly, building community power and the ability of residents to shape their own neighborhood. And all that is, I think, particularly meaningful to us from a stance of preventing displacement so that residents who are part of making their neighborhoods even better have confidence they can be part of that even better future for their neighborhood.
And can we refer to it as the mint model, the mixed income?
Yeah, so mixed income
Okay,
neighborhood
neighborhood
trust, short.
trust. So to shorten it up, we'll call it mint for the rest of this podcast. The mechanism behind mint. I was trying to explain this to some friends, and to me, it seemed like a REIT slash co-op. Like it is a real estate investment asset that is owned by the community. I was hoping you could actually talk about what is the financial tool here.
Yeah, I think being precise is the most helpful thing, probably. So
Yeah.
the legal structure for it is a literal trust. This is somewhat confusing in a housing community development world because the word trust is used for so many things that often actually are not trusts. An innovative thing we've done is create literal trusts. The legal structure we help set up is a perpetual purpose trust. Um, this is a little convoluted. It's come out of changes in trust law in the United States in the last 15 years or so. It's largely been used in transition of ownership companies or uh, companies where a founder is often selling the company but wants to hold on to values beyond profit maximization. So it's been used for a lot of operating companies. A smaller example of that would be Firebrand Bakery in Oakland, where the owner really cared about it serving individuals coming out of incarceration, wanted liquidity, but also wanted it to maintain that purpose alongside being financially responsible. So put it into a perpetual purpose trust and then allowed outside investors to still invest in it, but keeping that broader fiduciary responsibility. The most prominent example recently is Patagonia, the company, transferred to being a perpetual purpose trust. So we are using it in real estate. We actually learned that as part of these need finding interviews early on in our work. We are going around the country listening to neighborhood based organizations and groups and neighborhoods facing gentrification. The actual structure there, which is helpful to understand, is that it separates out the voting control from the economic shares, and the economic shares then can take any kind of capital. So you can have equity investors and mixed income neighborhood trust. This is distinct, I think, from your note of it being community ownership. There are family offices, there are individual investors who have equity stakes in the neighborhood trusts. It is not designed to be something which has to be raising resident capital. That allows a neighborhood to get access to a lot more capital they normally have. But all of the control sits in the perpetual purpose trust, which has essentially a broader fiduciary responsibility than the strict fiduciary responsibility the United States has created post 1970s or 1980s, where
Mhm.
profit maximization is the only legal fiduciary responsibility. So that fiduciary responsibility includes being financially responsible. So you can, unlike a nonprofit, you can actually serve the interests of an equity investor. However, you can also write in all kinds of other nuanced purposes, which really important to us is being serious about anti-displacement, building community power, making the neighborhood a better place.
Okay, that is very interesting and very helpful to help conceptualize what exactly the community's role is within the trust. and the separation. And I'm glad you talked about fiduciary responsibility because you usually think of a shareholder being able to hold accountable the leadership of an organization. And in this way, it seems what you're saying is those two things are separate, and you're really investing in the community's desire to fulfill whatever the nuances of what they think they're responsible towards, not necessarily just profit making. And you're nodding. So great. I'm understanding this. Can we talk a little bit about what assets are within the trust? And if I am a resident that has an opportunity to be part of a trust, how do I engage with the trust by either putting my own property into it, maybe accessing capital from the trust, or making decisions around the trust? So, what is a resident's role when it comes to the mint?
The way we always work is we support an existing neighborhood-based organization in being the partner on setting up a mixed income neighborhood trust for their neighborhood. Really key to us is that partner has legitimacy and capacity. Like the legitimacy side would be, are they representative of a neighborhood? How are they engaged in that neighborhood? For a resident involved in it, their participation therefore happens, I would say, in three primary ways. One, through their relationship with that neighborhood-based organization and what kind of legitimacy there may be. Two, when we're setting it up, we as Trust Neighborhoods help set up resident workshops that then co-write that purpose agreement. For that, we're looking out for places where there may be gaps or perspectives to be filled, which are not represented by those organizations. You see a lot of organizations which especially are overrepresented, if not entirely represented, by homeowners in neighborhoods which are majority renter. So one key part of those resident workshops for us is saying, can we have renting residents as part of these workshops who are living the experience of navigating this rental housing in this neighborhood in a way that gives perspectives and understanding of what this neighborhood trust needs to be navigating and who they need to be serving. And then three, there are governance positions, both at the trust stewardship committee level, which controls the perpetual purpose trust. So that's the legal authority over the whole mixed income neighborhood trust, or the LLC level, which is where those two shares exist, which again has an operating board for it as an operating company. And that operating company, again, has resident seats in there alongside the neighborhood-based organization seats. And they have flexible, independent seats they can do in order to add more expertise or perspectives.
Gotcha. What are some of the other actions that the trust could take to fulfill its purpose?
It is up to that trust stewardship committee interpreting that purpose agreement they write. So the primary one is the function of the mixed income neighborhood trust is mixed income ownership of real estate in that neighborhood to serve this purpose. So far, they've done all mixed income housing. Three of the neighborhood trusts have done, this is four. We had a fifth one launched just last month in Denver and Aurora, which is fantastic.
Congrats.
Four of the five have done all acquisition and renovation of housing. The one in Tulsa has actually been building some new infill housing alongside acquisition renovation, which is really wonderful. Many of the trusts have been capitalized to opportunistically acquire housing if they hit a certain box or criteria. And that's quite powerful in these neighborhoods where too often the buyers who can move with the speed of the market are not the buyers you want to have owning the neighborhood long term. A lot of the groups that are trying to take properties off the market and continue control are dependent on philanthropic or grant dollars that move so slowly they really can't get properties. We've worked hard for a couple of neighborhoods, so we'd love to see someone capitalize a neighborhood trust at very large scale to do this. Essentially to be capitalized to be acquiring those properties. If they had aligned owners, which certainly we've had ones where people have come forward from the neighborhood and go, I love this. Would they be interested in acquiring my property? It would be a purchase by the neighborhood trust from that person. On broader definitions, what they can be doing, I think a real interest of serving anti-displacement for all these neighborhoods is retail and commercial control, since small businesses matter so much. And there's certainly such frustration with rising retail or even just non-aligned retail owners really knocking out a lot of businesses, which are so meaningful to these neighborhoods and residents in the neighborhood having a place and feeling a belonging. I think it's very interesting. I learned the other day, New York Times had a very good piece on that, how much retail in Paris is. Paris has a very large affordable retail program, a lot of which is owned off the market, and they subsidize it in order to serve a French identity, which people go to Paris are like, oh, well, here's this wonderful experience. It's actually a huge intervention and effort to get a lot of retail spaces off the market so that you can enable the kinds of things people love about Paris. Why aren't we doing that for so many neighborhoods where you're seeing incredible businesses get knocked out because the out-of-state landlord, let them get by for 2 months when they don't have the right rent, or trying to jack it up so they can replace it with a business that is now paying a higher rent. So the short of that is mixed income ownership of real estate, focus on anti-displacement to make the neighborhood even better.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about renting versus owning and how the Mint thinks through that. From my understanding, it seems that the Mint comes in to acquire properties that are at risk of being sold to external investors who would then jack up rents and continue to drive local residents out. So the Mint would acquire, and then I think they would property manage to a rent level that is more commensurate with what the local community is currently paying or what would be affordable for somebody who is not going to be displaced. What happens when somebody wants to take ownership of an asset that they've been renting within the Mint? Is there an opportunity in the future for the Mint to sell housing to a resident so that they can own and build their own equity within the place they live?
So the homeowner versus renter debate, which is certainly a very live one in the United
Yes.
States in its identity, is one we've heard so much in the early interviews with neighborhood-based organizations. And there are not a ton of great analyses of gentrifying neighborhoods and displacement, but a really key one we actually cite in our materials. Low-income renters are displaced from gentrifying neighborhoods, and they get displaced to places with less employment opportunity, less safety, less health across the board. Their neighborhood becoming a better place to live not only does not make their life better, it makes their life worse. And that if the data just does not play out for people who have homes or not. A key part of that is moving people into home ownership when that is right. And what we are hearing was there are a lot of efforts to do this. We heard frustration from a lot of these neighborhoods of saying, we're a majority renter neighborhood. A lot of us are not in a place where we are going to buy soon or do not even want to buy. I think certainly home ownership comes with a lot of major risks and costs. And we are not being heard. We're being kind of chastised of saying, well, why aren't you a homeowner becoming a homeowner soon as our neighborhood all pushes in that direction? And in the
Wow.
meantime, we're getting kicked out. A member of the Trust Stewardship Committee for one of the first neighborhood trusts, she talked about the fact that she got really involved in her neighborhood before, helped it become a better place to live, then got her rent kicked up and got pushed out to this neighborhood. And she actually been very wary of getting involved with the neighborhood group we had partnered with because she said they're all homeowners. They're telling everyone to become a homeowner and they're making the neighborhood a nicer place to live. So why am I going to spend time with that group?
Mm.
And when she heard about the neighborhood trust, she was like, oh, this is serious about serving me and people like me who are the majority of the neighborhood, and really taking seriously the fact that maybe while we stabilize and find a place to live, maybe just long term, we want to have this option of high quality rental in our neighborhood. And then certainly there's the role of having affordable rentals as part of building your way towards homeownership and having cost savings and moving on that path. Uh, for all of this, I think making sure to address the needs of renting residents alongside homeownership, the neighborhood trusts also do serve homeownership in several ways, is that in the purpose agreements for the neighborhood trusts they have acquired as part of their ownership single family rentals, they wrote into it that they would like those single family rentals to move to homeownership long term, as long as that process does not reduce the affordable rentals in the neighborhood and serves anti-displacement. So we heard from one neighborhood early on, which I think is key in this, is they talked about, oh, there was a group working on building home ownership in the neighborhood. They bought a home which was sold by someone who evicted a family that was renting so they could sell to people so they could do the home ownership program. And so the group came in and had their celebration in front of the house saying, we create a homeowner. And they're like, but the resident we know who was living in the neighborhood forever got kicked out in the street.
And you've been talking a lot about the cities and neighborhoods that you've been working closely with for the last 5 years. Trust Neighborhoods has been in Kansas City, Tulsa, Boston, Fresno, and you're in early stage discussions with neighborhoods in Denver, Detroit, and St. Louis. And I want to ask you about your process in selecting these neighborhoods within these cities. And maybe if you can pull some examples of which neighborhoods you gravitated towards and what criteria you were looking for and how that played out.
For one, a great update to that list is that the Denver Aurora one is now a launched formed mixed income neighborhood trust. These
Amazing.
Colfax met as of a month ago and has its first apartment building really powerful neighborhood partner. The selection process we use is a set of criteria we rattle off all the time. So it may sound a little like this is a neighborhood in the path of growth, but where there's still feasible acquisition, that there's a neighborhood partner with legitimacy and capacity. And then there's a line towards clear capitalization of the neighborhood trust. And that's essentially it. The result of this is our pipeline of interested neighborhoods has grown. I think our actual list is in the hundreds now. Our actual
Wow.
viable short list is smaller than that. But we're constantly getting now inbound interest from neighborhoods across the country and hear about the work. The St. Louis partnership came out of a cold email to our website, hearing about the East Boston Neighborhood Trust. We went through our own internal process against those criteria, and we have our own internal committee for trust neighborhoods where people are pitching and reviewing and talking through possible neighborhood partners. And then we said, yeah, we think this is viable and if we use our capacity, which is quite limited. We're only an 8-person nonprofit and working on a threadbare budget, which donations can always help expand from that process and select the new partners. So Detroit and St. Louis are both, we've signed MOUs with both those partners and are working on creating what we really think are two quite powerful potential new neighborhood trusts.
I'm curious because we're in this moment where housing affordability has come up, the cost of living has come up, and you're sort of on the front lines of both of those gigantic issues. Are you thinking that Trust Neighborhoods is set up in a way that you've honed in on the criteria, regardless of what the future context might bring? You feel like you're set up for whatever boom and bust cycles?
It's a great question. There, I think one is the financial sustainability of a neighborhood trust
Hmm.
in its own right. Um, the in the name, the mix of incomes certainly helps on that in terms of having some unrestricted units which are paying for it long term. But a real strength is also the fact that you have so much preserved housing as an asset and it's priced that way means that in a downturn market, we've heard this from talking with
Mm.
various institutional investors, it actually is a stable counter-cyclical asset, which is certainly true for a lot of affordable housing. So from a financial investment standpoint, the fact that you have a largely counter-cyclical asset that people are putting money into helps a lot compared to someone who might be putting money into something entirely betting on high income housing. The other piece, which is really valuable here, is the actual stabilizing factor of the neighborhood trust. So we see this with, I'm going to think of the Northeast neighborhood in Kansas City, where either block by block or depending on different investors with the interest rates, you'll see people who are betting on long-term gentrification. There's a landlord in the neighborhood, the biggest landlord in the focus neighborhood of Northeast Neighborhood Trust we began to work is an LLC called Cashflow Kings LLC. They had bought a bunch of small apartment buildings. They seem to have a model of buy it, put no money into it, walk away from the violations as the building collapses. One of the first things they did was chop down all the old trees in front of a lot of the buildings because that's a maintenance cost. You see this a lot with some of these bad owners. But you see people who even went into a neighborhood on the fact that it is increasing in value long term, and they may be caught in their short term cycles. A lot of these people take out short term debt and or especially exposed to the change in interest rates and suddenly destabilize the neighborhood through that. And so the neighborhood trusts the fact that we capitalized it on a more than 10-year schedule, well capitalized, no short term debt has ever been used by a lot of neighborhood trusts. And so they can really acquire they always have the money to renovate a building. They've never helped a neighborhood trust acquire buildings without having money to actually do the work. Actually kind of serve almost as a stabilizing factor for that neighborhood longer term. As much as we think about the affordability side, it also comes from a quality side, accountability
Mm.
side.
Well, the name of your company, Trust Neighborhoods, it speaks to the financial mechanism, but also speaks to the social interaction that's necessary and really required behind each of these partnerships. And I can imagine that you're an 8-person team. You are mostly all remote. You're working throughout the country, and you might be seen effectively as outsiders coming to work in these communities that are facing a scary future around gentrification and displacement. And they want to work with you, but have had, untrusting or bad actors in their own neighborhoods that maybe they might be hesitant to trust outsiders. So, can you speak to that dynamic?
Absolutely. It's the reason we named Trust Neighborhoods is that being so crucial to the work. When we were choosing the name Trust Neighborhoods, we were told, do you really want that to be your name? Because that's such a high standard to hold yourself to. We're going to always go, can we trust you? And our first value is doubt trust neighborhoods. And as part of that value that we talk about as a nonprofit team is work with excellence in a way that is worthy of that trust. We do want to name ourselves that because that holds us to that standard. I think it's trying to live towards that for the experience of the team we've built, which is wonderful. I think we spent a lot of time in neighborhoods have seen a lot of that rational distrust of outsiders, of change. Really key for us is we're always responding to an existing neighborhood-based organization. And so we're working with and also now being invited into the neighborhood, often following long planning processes. So no one had created a nonprofit team of immediate capacity, listening to a neighborhood group saying when and where this is impactful, helping them set up a Masontown neighborhood trust where all the power sat in the neighborhood long-term. It was its own neighborhood trust. It could use this kind of capital. It could do this kind of work. I think that's a big part of the building the trust is we listened to the neighborhoods and built around this. A lot of the neighborhood partners talked about, they went, basically what you're describing is the work you do is something we already hired one person to work on. But realistically, the way a neighborhood organization works is she would spend a few hours a week on it because she got pulled in everything else the neighborhood group is doing. In the meantime, they're seeing their neighborhood change. Now, fortunately, having an 8-person team, we can throw hours in the day, which we hope is the least valuable thing. We hope we've built some good technical legal expertise and things that are more valuable than that. But sometimes it's just being a support partner, being a project manager, helping prepare materials, helping calls get scheduled, helping build relationships, and then doing it in a way that's really aligned towards building this long-term institution. I think one of the most complimentary things is one of the neighborhood partners we talked to early on noted in our very first meeting with them, I had said, were you guys just listening in on the meetings you've been having in-house for the last year or two? Because it sounds like what you're describing is exactly what we've been talking about, what we want to build. So I think that's one of the best things because we've been responding to what we've been hearing, it overcomes a lot of that distrust. And I think we were almost more worried that that distrust would be an insurmountable barrier than what we've actually seen in the work. I think partly that's because we had all worked in institutions, which, I mean, me working at Google and Sidewalk Labs, reasonable distrust of entities like Google and Sidewalk Labs at top-down entities, or working in city government. I was out in East New York, and the level of distrust, of course, it was a formative experience for me to hear residents in East New York identify as refugees of the upzoning and the gentrification that occurred in Williamsburg.
Yeah.
And they would say, we saw public officials do ribbon cuttings down our block and pat themselves in the back for the fact that they built affordable units, but no one in the neighborhood were in those units. At the same time, we're seeing grandchildren not able to live down the street from their grandparents anymore. And our entire community get uprooted in 5 to 10 years. And that was pretty formative. So it's understandable they would distrust. I think it's a different thing from coming from the stance of a nonprofit that from its very beginning, its DNA has been built in response to those neighborhoods, listening to their needs and running with that.
That's very poignant, especially pulling from your experience with Sidewalk Labs that, in the years since, there's been a lot of expose around the trust that was built and lost with that venture. And then also working under Mayor Bloomberg, you had a very unique role. And I understand that top-down approach, especially for neighborhoods that have been continuously disinvested in or just not heard, feels not good, for lack of better words. So you and your team have been working with these communities for up to 5 years right now. You have a vision for what this could look like and a pipeline of hundreds of neighborhoods that want to be a part of this. What does it look like to scale trust neighborhoods, and what timeline does that look possible on?
We've been looking at this as trust neighborhoods will be 5 years old next year. And we're pretty proud of the work we've done in terms of setting up 5 neighborhood trusts, building this team. I think just most powerfully hearing the stories of actual individuals and families who've been using the neighborhood trusts. One example that came out of East Boston, where there are 2 families that got priced out of a place in the neighborhood. They have families with kids in the schools. Neighborhood has some pretty good schools. And they actually moved to an emergency shelter so their kids could stay in the schools. The affordability level they need is outside the neighborhood and actually outside the city of Boston on the theme of suburbanization of low income. So their kids who have had to move school, they would have been moved away from all their family and friends and all their support system. And the East Boston Neighborhood Trust had 2 family-sized units. They matched with them and are able to stay in their neighborhood. Their kids don't have to move schools. They're able to have confidence that they will be there for as long as they like. That is really powerful, and that has happened in just 2 of the units of what is now a couple hundred units of housing, which is now under control across these neighborhood trusts. So that's the thing we're really proud of. If you look at the scale of the neighborhood trust, the number of neighborhoods we're hearing from that need this, even within the neighborhoods where they're working, the Northeast neighborhood in Kansas City, the neighborhood trust is operating a neighborhood that has 30,000 residents, right? That neighborhood trust has to get a lot bigger than it is right now in order to be doing a meaningful role in anti-displacement. That's not to say it has to do all of this. As you see in so many neighborhoods, which unfortunately there aren't that many, but ones that have succeeded in establishing mixed income dynamics, it is not that there are single entities that have done all of this work. It is, in fact, that there are myriad entities alongside each other, which together have created a sense of stability and belonging and self-determination. In fact, that may be more ideal. So we see that mixed income neighborhood trust is part of that kind of marbling across these neighborhoods. Around that, the real unlocks are one, building our team, building the expertise and just the extra team members in order to be able to work with more neighborhoods, say yes to more neighborhoods. But we can go even further. 2 is continuing to build the capital that understands the model, is willing to, 1, take the risk on the upfront, and then 2, start to see the performance of the neighborhood trust and go, look, if I put my capital in, I'm okay with the fact that I have less control, have slightly lower return, but I'll have a steady dividend. I'll be enabling incredible impact and work. We've seen family offices participate. We've seen foundations put in PRI. We are building that capital pool more and more. We'd like to see more and more people willing to take that risk at a big scale. And then 3rd is building the actual peer system and ecosystem of the mixed income neighborhood trusts. So we're already seeing a rich set of knowledge about what it means to be serving anti-displacement with this housing, what it means to be building up residents who may have never had these kinds of positions of power before. Even just mundane things like, board mechanics and reviewing financials, but also getting over understandable trauma and a lot of work there, as well as be able to step in to solve their own problems, not only akin to what trust neighborhoods might be doing, but even more, even better than what we're doing in terms of a neighborhood in Boston may learn a lot from what a neighborhood in Fresno is doing because they are building this knowledge. They're in a neighborhood. They are experts themselves. So I think a big part of this for us has been building that peer group. And what's really exciting is as the neighborhood trusts grow, as there are more neighborhood trusts, that becomes a stronger and stronger community, which is self-resilient.
Thanks for tuning in to Building Better Cities. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you could help spread the word by sharing with someone, it would mean so much to us. To learn more about our work, check out buildingbettercities.com. We're excited to keep the conversation going. So until next time, let's keep building better cities together.